Today I'm heading down into the basement of the League-Kempner house where probably 80% of the structural problems can be found. It's dark and dirty as you saw in the basement tour video. I call it a basement, but it's really not in the common use of the word. Basements are generally below ground, and this space started off being at ground level when the house was constructed. Today the basement floor is about 15 inches below ground level. How that happened is a whole other video I'll do in the future. The first real living space is directly above, and I always refer to that as the first floor. So in these videos, if you hear me say basement or ground floor, I'm talking about this space right here that we're looking at today. The basement covers the entire footprint of the house and was probably used as a laundry and storage space when the house was built. I've talked in other videos about how important it is to have a good roof on a house and keep it dry. But just as important is that a house have a good supporting structure underneath. At the League-Kempner house, the structure was in terrible shape. The more we dug into problems under the house, the worse things got. We started work in the basement on day one, and it's been almost continuous for over 9 months, and there's no end in sight. New problems are constantly cropping up. We're down in the basement of the house to show you the actual structure that most people don't see, and that's what's underground. We've done a lot of digging, so some of it is exposed today. But what we have are big concrete beams. Remember that this house sits on land that's very soft and full of water. The water table's high. Weight tends to sink, and it has to have something to support that weight. So under these beams that you can't see underground are big brick and concrete pads to distribute that weight out over a wide area. These beams then rise up and they crisscross all through the house, and they actually go around the whole perimeter of the house, the outside wall. Here's what the footing underground probably looks like. We ran into one digging the trench for the new electric service. Notice that it's made from a different type of brick than the wall of the house. It's redder and a different size. On top of the beam, there are columns that rise up and carry the weight of these big wooden load-bearing beams of the house. And then to support the floors and the walls, there are floor joists that sit on top of the beam and run to the other side of the room, either to another beam or resting in a pocket in the outside wall. And remember that that outside wall sits on one of those big beams. We're going to do a little science experiment.
It's science, y'all.
This would be a column with no footing under it. Ta-da. So what happens when the weight of the house goes on that column with no footing? It just sinks in the ground. But now you're the column, and there's a footing behind you, a board. Step on that. It doesn't sink, it doesn't go anywhere, because the weight of the house is spread out.
And I'm as big as a house, so this is a valid comparison.
This type of construction is referred to as load-bearing brick because the outside brick walls don't just provide decoration, they are part of what holds the house up. Load-bearing masonry is one of the oldest and most widespread construction techniques in the world. Every wall element in load-bearing brick structure carries the load to the foundation, where it's then transferred to the ground. To meet this purpose, the walls are constructed strong with a thickness of 9 inches or more. Even a one-story house will have 3 layers of brick. The mortar between the bricks is a key element to the strength and structural integrity of the wall. So what went wrong with the supporting structure of the League house? Everything. First, the mortar used to construct this house was a mixture of sea sand and lime. It is very soft and deteriorated from years of harsh climate, wind, and water intrusion. In many places, the mortar is just non-existent. Second, the outside wall of the basement has 17 windows in it. And as you learned in the garage video, lentils above the windows are critical to maintaining the structural integrity of the wall. The original wood lentils had completely disintegrated. Here are some of the remnants of the wood lentils that came out. These are actually in better condition than most, but you can see the extent of the decay. Third, these old bricks are very soft and porous and absorb a lot of water.
Water soaking into the brick has rotted all the ends of the floor joists and the beams that were resting on the outside walls and caused horrible mold. I'm going to do a little demonstration for you. This is a Cedar Bayou brick. It's what the house is made out of. It was made here in Houston on Cedar Bayou. It's a very porous brick. It's called a common brick. It's not very pretty. It was made to be inside plastered walls and not show. So this was designed specifically for the type of house we have. I'm going to put it in this plastic tub and put 12 cups of water in there, let it sit for a couple hours and see how much it absorbs. And if you watch, look at the bubbles coming out. That's air coming out of the brick that's being replaced with water. After a few hours, I poured the water off and measured it and found out that the brick had absorbed 1.5 cups of water. That's a lot of water in just one brick. So think of the hundreds of thousands of bricks in this house and how much water they can absorb. Fourth is if the water soaking into the brick wasn't enough, water coming in from the big roof leak made it all the way down to the basement and rotted out a significant section of floor joist. And fifth, termites have been attracted to that water and had started working their way through the structure. They've made it all the way from the ground to the very top of the roof. And sixth, idiot humans have made modifications and cut through supports without understanding the definition of load bearing, and it seriously compromised the structure. This example just blows my mind. At some point, central air conditioning was put into the house and 2 floor vents were added to the kitchen. Somebody probably put an X on the floor in the kitchen and said, "Put it here," without knowing what was underneath. When they ran into a double beam, they didn't just scoot the hole over, they cut through the beams and removed them. We've patched it, but why would you cut out a double beam? It's just inconceivable. Anyway, just like you saw in the bedroom video, the first step was total demolition of anything in the basement that prevented an inspection of the structure. In this case, the entire basement was clad in either beadboard or pine tongue and groove boards, and it looked great but hid the horrors underneath. This demolition was nasty. All the old plumbing and electrical had to be cut out. All the wood was sorted to either save, recycle, or send to the dump. It took weeks. Once everything was uncovered, there was so much wrong, it was hard to know where to start. My contractor and I decided to just jump in and get started and kind of see where things led. Along the east wall under the kitchen and butler's pantry, every floor joist was rotted and no longer providing any support. The floor was cantilevered over a distance of about 17 feet, and the floor of the kitchen and butler's pantry had dropped by over 3 inches at the outside wall. So that's where we decided to start. It quickly turned into a nightmare. We joked that we went through plans A, B, C, D, E, and F in less than a week. I've never had so many false starts and stops in a project before. One big problem was how the kitchen floor was made. Strips of wood were nailed to the side of each floor joist, and then pieces of wood were laid across to create a well between each joist. Concrete was poured into that well up to the top of the joist. Once that was cured, another 3 inches of concrete was poured on top to make a smooth surface to install the floor tile. At first we thought we could just pull the rotted joist out and slip a new one in. Wrong. Think of the floor being constructed in layers, like pages in a book. When you hold a book by the spine and bend the book, you can see how the pages slide against each other and the edge of the book doesn't stay square, it fans out. Here's a simple line drawing that kind of exaggerates what happens. If the pages were glued together, the book wouldn't bend at all. That's why laminated beams that are made of layers of glued together lumber can be 2 or 3 times stronger than regular lumber. But that glue has to hold. Unfortunately, under the extreme unsupported weight of the kitchen floor, the bond between the first and second layer of concrete failed. The concrete on the bottom became loose and started falling down when we pulled the floor joist out. And FYI, concrete weighs 150 pounds per cubic foot. The kitchen is 400 square feet, 6 inches thick concrete. That's 200 cubic feet of concrete at 150 pounds per cubic foot, or 30,000 pounds of concrete just on the kitchen floor. And that doesn't take into account the servants' hall, the butler's pantry, or the kitchen pantry. So this posed a big risk for the guys having to work underneath, and it took some time to get the loose concrete down safely. You can see in this picture that some of the concrete didn't shear away close to the supporting beam because it didn't flex as much. You can also see just how thick that concrete was. Once that was done, all the rotten joists got cut back and new ones were installed. Because of the weight, a new beam and post would have to be added where the old and new joists joined. So I had to commit kind of where to make that cut without knowing if there was anything underneath to support the posts we needed to set. We just had to make the decision on the fly and go forward. Part of the joists removed from under the kitchen were long enough to be reused, where shorter joists were replaced in other parts of the house. These new joists rest on the exterior walls, and the lintels probably should have been replaced first, but it takes time to order steel and then have it galvanized, so we worked a little backwards and just made do with the temporary supports until the lintels could be delivered. If you watch the garage video, you already know about lintels and why they're important, but for those of you who didn't see it, let's do a quick review. Anytime you have a hole like a window in a brick wall, there has to be something above that hole to support the brick above, and that's what a lintel is. Because exterior brick walls are structural and they're 3 layers thick, each layer of brick has to have its own lintel to support it. Down here in the basement, there were 4 different types of window supports in action. There were wood lintels, soldier brick courses, this is that vertical row of bricks that can span small openings, and then cast concrete lintels and brick arches.
Okay, these guys don't mess around. They've been on site for 5 minutes. They've already got the mixer going. They're bringing in the lintels to get them placed, but I want to show you this wall. Here's where the wood lintel sat, spanned across, and set on the other side. So that's the first lintel on the interior wall. The second lintel on the exterior wall is that vertical brick that you can see. And you can tell there's no mortar. The bricks are just sitting there. They're not strong at all. If you look at the next window over, it was even in worse shape. You can see where the wood lintel sat, but that is the outside stucco skin of the building showing. The vertical brick lintel is completely gone. You can see other bricks falling out. But don't worry, I'm safe. We have temporary support beams holding everything up.
After a little more brick removal, it became clear that what I thought was the exterior plaster was really a cast concrete lintel holding up that outside width of brick. Fortunately, most of these were in good shape. We replaced the wood with oversized galvanized steel angle iron. To replace the lintels, the joist above had to be supported and any loose brick removed as far as we could reach up and pull out of the wall.
With no trouble at all.
Repointing was done to create a secure place to set the new lintel.
How about our new mouth-watering chipotle chicken and bacon flatbread pizza? These and other favorites.
It takes so much more mortar than you would think. The basement windows took almost 40 bags of mortar and lots of sand. As the lintels were replaced, the brick above was repaired as needed to create secure pockets for the floor joists to sit. Once one window was done, the temporary supports came down and everything was moved over to the next window, and it was repeated 16 times. The front basement windows have brick arches. One of those failed completely. It's not correct, but for safety reasons, we just threw up an extra steel lintel for the time being, and we'll deal with the arch at some point in the future.
A little change of plans. We've had to add an extra support. The entire brick arch was bad, so we're going back in place with a double straight lintel. You made a big hole.
Eventually, all the lintel work was complete and all the rotted floor joists were replaced and some of the temporary beams could come down. At this point, I brought in a structural engineer who specialized in wood framing to look at everything and see if there were any corrections that needed to be made. And I was thrilled that we didn't have to make any changes, and he even gave the go-ahead to keep one of the main beams we were planning on replacing and repair the routed end with a special wood hardener. A big problem area was the main carry beam located under the servant stair. We replaced that beam with one the size of the original, but there's so much weight above that beam that the new beam immediately sagged and started to fail. So we had to jack everything up again and replace it with a much larger beam. It started to sag. So we need to set a permanent post to help support that massive weight of the servant stair above it. By this time, the cistern had been demolished so we could see where the original brick and concrete beams were in the ground. By pure luck, one was directly under the beam needed to support the new kitchen joist, so those posts were easy to set. But there was no beam under the post needed for the servant stair, so we'll have to add a footing to support that. With all the rotten wood replaced and all the permanent posts set, it was time to start jacking the house up to get it level. To do that, multiple hydraulic jacks were brought in and set on post. A fancy GPS device is used to check level and decide where to begin jacking things up. Of course, the lowest spot that needed to be jacked up first was directly over my laundry sinks, so they had to come out. It makes me so nervous when irreplaceable things like that get fooled with.
These are worth twice what I paid for my first car. Okay, that's not fair. Are they making fun of me? They're making fun of those.
Yeah, these are good for water people.
Ah! Tell them they're worth like $2,000 a piece. How much do you think they weigh, Robert? 300 pounds? Each sink? Holy crap. With the sinks out of the way, the jacking began. There were a lot of jacks. Sections were jacked up about 1/4 of an inch at a time, and then the team would move to the next set of jacks. You don't want to jack up one section all at once. That would cause other problems. So they would do a little, stop and check the level, and then do it again.
It's a 1/2 inch low this way.
Yeah, but look how closed up you are.
Yeah. Now, see over here.
Yeah, the gap's only like 1 inch right now.
Yeah, that's 1.5 in the corner, but an inch way here.
Yeah.
But over here.
Ever so slowly, the east side of the house was raised almost 3 inches. Okay. There it is. We're at a level. Oh. My cabinet doors open and close. I'd like to say all went well, but that's not how things go around here. I'm going to stop for now. This basement needs a lot more work before anything else can happen in this house, and I'm sure there's going to be new challenges and more course corrections before things get done. So be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss any of this exciting journey trying to save this grand old house from ruin. And hit the like button to help others find us on YouTube, and leave a comment or ask a question. Thanks for your support. Just watching these videos helps to save the League-Kempner house for future generations to enjoy.